All right, welcome. Today, we are diving deep into the maze of learning itself. We're going to trace the entire history of teaching methods, not just for a history lesson, but to show you how you can build a personalized system that actually works for you. Let's get into it.
So, does this sound familiar? You absolutely crushed it in one class, but in another, it felt like you were hitting a brick wall. Well, what if I told you the problem wasn't you? What if it was the method used to teach you? That's the big idea we're going to unpack today.
So, here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the two basic ways our brains are wired to learn. Then, we'll take a trip back in time to the rigid old school playbook, see how a totally human centered revolution changed everything. And then, the best part, we'll get you set up to build your very own perfect method.
Okay, so let's kick things off by getting right to the core of it. We need to look at the fundamental question that sits under every single teaching method out there. How do we actually, get new stuff to stick in our brains? It really boils down to two main philosophies. First, you've got deductive learning. This is probably what you remember from school. The teacher says, here's the rule, and then you do a bunch of exercises. Rule first, then examples. But on the other side, you have inductive learning. This flips the script completely. You get a whole bunch of examples first, and your brain has to play detective and figure out the pattern all on its own. Now, keep these two ideas in your back pocket because they're basically the DNA for everything else we're going to talk about.
Right, our first big stop on this journey, the old school playbook. These were the early methods, and they treated language less like this living, breathing thing and more like, well, a machine, something with a rigid structure that you had to memorize and master. And the big three from this era were, first, grammar translation. This was super academic, all about reading ancient texts and translating them. Then, as a total reaction to that, the direct method popped up. It banned translation completely. The idea was to force you to think in the new language, just like a kid does. And finally, the audiolingual method, which basically saw language as a set of habits that had to be drilled into you over and over and over again. And this quote just nails the whole philosophy of the audiolingual method. It's like taking your brain to the gym for endless reps. Think of all those repeat after me drills you've done. It's a brute force approach, and hey, it can be really good for building a solid foundation. But the big obvious enemy? Yeah, just pure mind-numbing boredom. So after decades of these really rigid mechanical ways of teaching, something amazing happened. A revolution. The focus shifted completely away from the nuts and bolts of the language and onto the learner, onto their mind, their feelings. The new thinking was simple but profound. If a student is stressed out, they just can't learn. And this big shift gave us what are called the designer methods. And let me tell you, some of them were pretty out there. You had the silent way, where the teacher basically says nothing, forcing you to figure everything out. Then there was Suggestopedia, which is kind of like Zen learning. You've got comfy chairs, classical music, all to help you learn subconsciously. And of course, Total Physical Response, which turned learning into a giant game of Simon Says by linking words to actions. Now, this little game is a perfect example of the silent way in action. Look at this. There are no instructions. You try dragging an apple to the blue basket. It works. You try dragging run to blue. Nope, rejected. You have to figure out the rule yourself. Blue is for nouns, red is for verbs. You discover it through pure trial and error. See, this is that inductive learning we talked about earlier, but taken to the absolute extreme. It's all about learning by doing, not by being told what to do. So for decades, everyone was on this quest for the holy grail, the one perfect method that would work for every single person on the planet. But as more and more of these really unique approaches came out, a new idea started to take hold. Maybe the search itself was the problem. And that all came to a head in the 90s. This was a huge deal. Experts basically declared that the era of methods is over. The whole idea of finding a single, universal best way to teach was tossed out the window. And this opened the door for a much more flexible and honestly a much more personalized way of thinking about learning. And that brings us right up to today, to the modern era. Because if the search for the one best method was a dead end, a brand new path opened up. The responsibility shifted from the textbook to you, the student. It's not about finding a method anymore. It's about creating your own. And this is the key idea right here. Method synergistics. I know it sounds super academic, but think of it like this. You're not ordering a single meal off a menu anymore.
You are at a giant learning buffet. You get to take a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You're combining the absolute best parts from all these different methods to build a system that's perfectly tailored to you. You're not just a follower anymore. You are the architect of your own learning. So how do you even start building this thing? Well, this chart is an awesome tool. Ask yourself, what kind of learner do you want to be? Do you love being a problem solver, figuring things out for yourself? Then you should definitely look into techniques from the silent way. Or maybe you prefer being a pattern practicer with really clear drills. Audiolingualism is your best friend. Or hey, maybe you're an improviser who just wants to jump in and start communicating even if it's messy at first. Understanding your role helps you pick the right tools and, maybe even more importantly, find a teacher or a class that actually fits your style. And finally, no matter what techniques you decide to borrow, these big B's are universal. This is your personal success checklist. Are you using your brains and actively problem solving? Is your environment breezy and low stress? Are you practicing with your buddies? Are you using your body to connect words to actions? Do you have a real belief that you can succeed? And have you set clear bounds or goals? I'm telling you, nailing these fundamentals is what turns a random collection of cool techniques into a seriously powerful learning machine. So here's the big takeaway. The next revolutionary learning method isn't going to be found in some dusty old textbook. It's going to be the one that you build for yourself. You're in the driver's seat. You can mix the drills from one method with the discovery of another. You're in control. So the only question left is, what's in your toolkit?